Hey folks, welcome back to DCS. A little over a month ago I posted a video flying the MiG-19 on Hebler's Cold War server in VR, and in that video I highlighted a few things that I'm conscious of doing differently in VR compared to track AR because of it being more awkward, because I'm not a contortionist by trade, I'm not very bendy, and having that physical limitation is not something that you usually have to put up with in track AR. So was I happy to just suck in dogfights, or did I want to do something about it? And over the last few weeks I've been developing strategies to fly in VR and still be proficient in the dogfight, to work around my physical limitations of unbendiness, rather than just thinking, fuck VR, let's just stick to track AR because it's easier. My whole thing really, what I really get a kick out of in flight sims, is being in a disadvantaged aircraft and still coming out on top. So call it a weird kink, but VR being difficult or more difficult, there's a certain satisfaction in doing well despite that limitation. Like handicapping yourself and still succeeding is peak satisfaction for me. So now that I've finally wrapped my head around getting the VR headset running well, my new obsession is doing well in VR. So we're going to look at some of that today and share it with you. And hopefully, if any of you are making the transition from track AR to VR, or perhaps even if you're just starting fresh with VR from the off and you have no prior sim experience, then this can give you some idea of how to approach things to make things a bit more comfortable and a little bit easier than they might otherwise be. So the first lesson was gauging distance, and VR typically is praised for making this easy, but honestly I have to disagree, because if you've played in 2D for long enough, then your brain figures out range in a sort of unconventional way. We have two eyes as humans, right? So if you look out of the door, out the window, and you look at a car in the distance, you can roughly tell how far away it is, right? Because you know how big a car is. So you're looking at how much the size changes over distance. In 2D, when you're playing DCS, that doesn't even enter your head because you aren't physically there. The objects aren't their physical size. They're on a flat monitor. You don't have binocular vision. None of it's relevant at all. You work out distance through other means. And personally, I don't even know what those other means are. What I do know is that I can intrinsically tell when I'm flying it on a flat screen whether I'm in gun range or not. And if I put the headset on, the VR headset, suddenly I have no freaking idea at all. And that's because you suddenly become aware of how massive the scope of the situation that you're in actually is. An F5 is what, maybe 16 meters long, and gun range is within about 600 meters, let's say. How many F5s fit in 600 meters? Because it's a fucking lot, isn't it? I can't even be asked to work it out. Five and a bit per 100 meters. 30 something F5s in a line. Can you actually imagine how far that is? It's crazy. Imagine looking out your window and trying to pick out something that's 600 meters away, and then actually imagine firing a machine gun from a plane at something that's that far away, traveling at 500 knots. It's mind-blowing, it's insane. And that's what you have to think about in VR, because that's actually what you're doing, that's actually what it looks like. And it's so different from 2D that I just suck at it. I massively sucked at it. So there were two things I did to teach myself to do it better. One was to just fire missiles at stuff, whether I thought they were going to hit or not, because I can judge distance in 2D, and I know that when I fire a missile, I have some idea of how long it's going to take to reach a target at a set distance. So what I would do is, in my head, I'd think, well, if he's as far away as I think he is, then the missile should take this amount of time to get to him. And I didn't know exactly how many seconds in my head, but I had a rough ballpark figure. And if the missile took less time or more time, then it means my distance assumption was wrong, and it would help me sort of correct for it subconsciously over time through hundreds of missile launches. And then the other thing I did was think about how when you're in formation with a friendly, you don't position to shoot them, do you? You're kind of off to the side a bit, and that angular difference makes distance way easier to judge. So if someone's directly off your left or directly off your right, then you know that you're flying level with them, because obviously it's just obvious, isn't it? But if you're directly behind them, you don't have any angular difference to gauge the range. So when you're approaching a bandit, pretend that you're going to form on their wing rather than just posture for a gunshot, because if you're off to the side a little bit, that angular difference makes it way easier to tell how far away they are. The next lesson was situational awareness, and you might be thinking, well, surely you already had that from when you were flying in Track AR, and yeah, you're not wrong, but the difference is, it's more difficult, and because it's more difficult, you have to think about it differently to keep the difficulty level more akin to what you're used to, so you have to change what you know to be more easy to apply. The best way that I can draw an example to this is if you've played War Thunder Realistic Battles, which I imagine a lot of people will have, then you'll know that in that mode you fly in a third person camera view and you have mouse control. And it's quite easy to keep track of targets because there are no line of sight restrictions on your view because you're not in the plane. There's no cockpit, there's no canopy bow, there's no like struts or support structure that get in the way. So if someone flies under you, it doesn't matter because you can still see them. If you then transition from realistic battles into simulator battles and now you're stuck in the cockpit, then it becomes apparent very, very early on that you have to start flying the plane in a different way just to be able to keep eyes on the target. Like the orientation of your aircraft in relation to your bandit actually matters in a way that you're just not used to accounting for before. So even though the game you're playing is the same and the objective is the same, how you achieve it has to change to make it stay doable. And that essentially is what the transition from Track AR to VR feels like, because nothing has changed about the game. It's the same game. I'm using the same like camera view. I'm still in the cockpit, but my mobility has changed. Like it's no longer as easy to look to the same places in the same time frame or for as long, and you have to think about approaching situations differently in order to make it easier. And that's not necessarily to say that VR is at a disadvantage to Track AR, which is what my initial impression was. It just means that you have to think ahead a bit more and treat engagements in a different way. And that's been like the secret source of my satisfaction for transitioning to VR, because initially I just hated the fact that I was dying a lot more frequently because I felt like VR was making me a worse pilot. But in actuality it's making me a better one because I'm having to plan ahead further. So I'll give you an example. In the MiG-19 clip that I referenced earlier, I said that I was often pulling too hard because the further I turn the plane, the less far I have to turn my head to keep track of the target. So I would bleed off all of my energy in a fight for the sake of my neck comfort, and then I'd end up dying horribly because I just became a brick and I didn't have the energy to manoeuvre out of the way of the bandit anymore. So I've had to start thinking about fights in a way that my neck comfort obviously is still important, but so is the energy, because if I don't maintain the energy then I'll die. But if I don't pull hard enough then I can't keep eyes on the target. So how do you combat that issue? You just have to approach the fight in a completely different way. So going back to the War Thunder example, in realistic battles, if you're trying to pull lead for a gunshot, because you can see under your plane because you're on an external camera view, you can pull extremely insane amounts of lead that in simulator battles from the cockpit you just wouldn't be able to see the target. So in sim battles you have to get into the control zone and you have to take low aspect shots. But as you get better at doing that, you'll find that actually you can still pull crazy lead. You just have to roll your plane level with the contact's travel path before you take the shot, because then they're crossing your nose horizontally and not vertically. So that's one way of solving that problem. The neck mobility bendiness problem needs to be solved in a different way. So what I've been doing to approach a merge differently, just to give you another example. In Track AR, if the EWR report says that the contact is directly to my east, then I would literally just turn directly to my east and I would fly head to head with that target, because when we merge, looking straight backwards in Track AR isn't difficult, but in VR it really, really is. So to combat that difficulty, I've instead been approaching with an offset of maybe 30 to 45 degrees. So I'm not looking forwards to try and find them, I'm actually looking out to my left or out to my right. What that means is that when I spot them and the merge is coming in, if I time my turn well, then I never have to look directly backwards. I can get away with maybe looking 120 degrees off instead of 180. And the better I time the turn, the less far I have to turn my neck. Another example from a clip I actually already showed, but I'll chuck it back on screen. I was in the Mirage F4 and there was a Phantom on my 6, and beforehand with Track AR, I would look behind me and then I would turn a different direction because I would anticipate the target appearing on the other side of the plane. In VR, if you do it that way around, it takes you a lot longer to switch the shoulder that you're looking over. So you kind of have to stay looking over the original shoulder as you turn the plane, and then switch directions after you've completed the turn, because that helps you to maintain visual for the longest possible time, which is similar to how if you've ever played a shooter on console and then played the same shooter on PC, because it takes so much longer to aim with analog sticks. When you peek a corner, you kind of have to make sure that you're already pointing where you want to look. Whereas on PC, you can peek the corner and then aim, because you can aim so much faster with a mouse. It's kind of like that, except your head is the aiming device rather than your control input, if that makes any sense. So with Track AR, your movement is kind of like using mouse acceleration. Using VR is kind of like playing on a controller with analog sticks. So you have to be looking where you want the target to be and keep them in view for the longest time possible before you change your view angle, rather than doing it first in the knowledge that you can just snap back quickly. So you just have to think about things a little bit differently. The other thing as well is that when you're in VR, to actually look fully backwards often requires like bracing your body against your desk or your chair arms, or maybe your joystick mount if you have one. Because if you're just using your core muscles to rotate, then holding that position without support is difficult to do in general, but also difficult to do for a long time. So you can come off your throttle if you're turning right, for example, and use your left hand to help you twist your body further, which makes looking behind it to the right much easier. And likewise, if you come off your stick, it makes looking left easier, but obviously then you can't control the plane. So there's like a balance factor to consider there. So all these little things that you do differently because you're in VR are considerations that you just don't need to make in Track AR. But I think the fact that you have to think them through will actually make you a better pilot. It's kind of the same as how I would argue that you're a better driver if you drive a manual car or know how to drive a manual car. Because you have to factor everything in to know what gear is going to work in what situation. You have to plan ahead and you have to anticipate things, because you need to react before the fact rather than afterwards. Whereas in an automatic, because it just does it all for you, that planning doesn't come into things as much. So that's the end of the video for today, folks. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, then let me know down below. If you have any suggestions for future video content ideas, then let me know those as well. I'd be eager to hear your thoughts on that. If you have enjoyed the footage you see in the background taken with the Pimax Crystal Light today, then consider checking out the Pimax affiliate link in the video description below to get your hands on one for yourself. For reference to the UK people, the Pimax Crystal Light retails for about £650 for the base headset, or £730 with the hand controllers. And if you use code BulletFromEnemy at the checkout, then you'll get $10 off your order. You could also join Pimax's Discord, because they are constantly flinging deals around like no tomorrow, and they've recently announced a payment plan service which lets you pay monthly to spread the cost so that it doesn't bore a hole in your wallet. Beyond that, you can also check out the Air Models affiliate link. With Christmas coming up, if you have any aviation enthusiasts in your family or friendship groups, then there's plenty of options to go out on there. There are models for every plane you can think of, and probably some that you can't. And then the last thing I want to plug before I let you go is my membership scheme. So if you become a channel member, the highest perk is early access to my content. So if you want to see my Pimax review when it's finally finished, then you'll get a earlier look at that. Beyond that, thanks a lot for watching, folks. Hope you've enjoyed again, and fingers crossed I see you in the next video. Cheers.